Ngai Mob, welcome to another episode of the Warrior Dreaming podcast. I would like to begin by acknowledging and paying my respects of the Wiradjuri people of the Kulin Nations and pay my respects to elders both past, present and emerging. And during this time, I would also like to acknowledge anyone that's going through a hard time across Australia, but particularly in Victoria at the moment, and internationally to any mob that may hear this, because we're back in lockdown. We've got more cases than ever, but we've got certain groups of people that are being targeted. They're locked in towers. Like, it's a really, really hard thing to see. And then again is showing the gap in our society between those who have an opportunity and those who don't, and the gaps in our social equality in terms of a lot of people on the outside are judging a lot of these ethnic minority groups, people with disabilities, people on social welfare that are stuck in our high-rise towers, and they're being judged for the fact that the hallways are too small, that they couldn't social distance, and they didn't have access to laundries. I live near these high-rises, and the hardest thing to see is that they do look like prison cells, yet next to them is all these new high-rises that are being built like apartments for people who can afford to buy, and the disparity between the two is just absolutely heartbreaking. But again, I think that it's another layer being peeled back and something that we can no longer ignore, because it's being brought to the forefront about the disparity of wealth distribution in a country like Australia. And I'm super excited today to be having a conversation with a person who really is a warrior, someone who leads from the heart, someone who has had their own darkness and their own challenges, and who shows up not just for himself but his family, our communities, and also holds no bars bullshit conversations, like as honest as they come, and someone that I've been able to connect with and be guided by and learn from over the last couple of years, and just watch his journey just grow and blossom. Welcome, Joe Williams.
Thanks, sister. Thank you so much. It's a good time to be, always good time to be chatting, but I think, you hit on the topics that we're going to be speaking about. Everyone is looking for answers at times, and it's good to be able to share perspective of where we come from individually as people, and like, right from the beginning of the journey that I've been on, talking about, the stuff that I do, the amount of people that said, you know what, you've just put a voice to what I feel or what I go through. So not only with the mental health stuff, but there are people in communities that are great communicators, right? And our people have been oral storytellers forever. So, I think, whilst having conversations is what we class it as today, but if we look at what we're doing, we're storytelling, in a different format or a different way we do it. So it's always good to hold space and to be able to share that.
Yeah, no, look, I think I'm super excited, because I believe that now more than ever it's important to have these conversations, real conversations, because over the last week, I've had some difficult choices to make, some truths to kind of face the reality of. I was a part of a panel last week, a friend of mine who is a non-Aboriginal woman, but she's a marketer, she's a award-winning businesswoman and stuff like that. And she messaged me and she's like, I want to hold a panel on this Black Lives Matters movement, racial inequality, and what's happening in Australia and America. She goes, but I don't want it to be tokenistic. I want to do something, and I want to reach out to my network. So she's like got this network of, and the idea was to support people in marketing and business, how that they can really add value to this and do it from a place of good intentions and actions rather than just empty words. And 3 people showed up. Like, between all the women that were on the panel, there was 4 of, like, there was Nina, myself, Karen and Maureen, and 3 people had made the investment to show up. And I was like, well, I have over 3,000 connections on my LinkedIn. Nina's the same and all that. And I was like, and 3 people thought that this was worthy to show up and have a conversation and invest some money in as well. And I was like, it just, that that fire kind of grew in me of people going, hold on, there's a lot of people talking, but there's not a lot of people walking. And then I was home in community, and there's a young woman who has just come out publicly on her Facebook to say and share her story of being sexually abused by a family member. And for years she'd been told not to say anything by the family, like she'd been, and that comes with multiple layers, and we won't go into that in this one. But why I bring up her is when I saw her, I said, Bubby, I see you. I understand that experience because I've been there, and I'll be home in a couple of weeks and we can start to hang out because I'm moving home. Like I'm feeling called to go home and be home on country and prove to myself that I can build a successful business, but still be based at home on country with my community where I'm feeling I'm needed most right now. I feel like Melbourne has so much support. It has so many amazing practitioners and mob here already doing amazing stuff. But when we get to our rural and regional communities, it's not as strong as resources and stuff like that as what the big cities have. And the excitement and the hope in her eyes. And my oldest daughter was sitting in the car and she saw it too. And she goes, Ngamika, because my kids call me Ngamika, which is mum in Barkindji, and we're trying to reuse our language and whatnot. And she just goes, Ngamika, I think I'm starting to understand how you can help people and why you are the way you are. And yeah, it's just this going, I want to hold people who can do some good accountable and going, well, where are you showing up? Because these young ones, like they're dealing with so much, and they're still trying to take steps, but they're just constantly being weighed down by more and more and more. And yet there's these people who can help support people like me and you to do this work in the communities and stuff. And yet they're still sitting in their ivory towers and going, well, we don't know what to do.
Yeah, it's difficult, because a lot of the time, especially with, going back to your point of the abuse in communities, a lot of families at times silence it, not because they don't want people to hear it. It's because the embarrassment that it probably shows some reflection on who we are, or if it were to happen in my family and I were to silence it, then maybe people might think that that's a reflection of me, so it probably speaks to, and this is a, it's a delicate conversation. I get that and I understand that, but I've always been someone that tries to do things that's right, I'm not innocent, and by any means, I'm not perfect, but trying to do things right for the greater good, and the whole truth telling process around this stuff. This is what we need to bring to the surface, to the light, because whilst we know that there are issues in communities, we also know that there can be solutions, and the issues in communities are stemming from somewhere else. I don't look at what issues are, because we know they're there and they're in every community. I look at why the issue. I don't question what, I question why, and that helps. It shows a different conversation. When you can have a look at the perspective of why it's happening, you start to look at a different conversation as to, what's going on under the surface in communities. So, and that's the stuff we've got to heal. It's all well and good to bang on about, and there's different people that get paraded out for the media, particularly white media. There are pockets of our mob that get paraded out for the white media to talk about the abuse in our communities, and I've said it openly. I know the unfortunate stuff's there. We know it's there. It ain't about trying to silence it. For me, it's about trying to find out why. Let's find out why and let's start to heal that, rather than everyone talks about and bangs on about the millions of dollars that goes into communities. The millions of dollars that goes into communities are going to non-Indigenous NGOs that are just putting band-aids on these issues.
Kind of preoccupied.
Addressing it. So like let's look at the truth of of what's really happening and why it's really happening. And that's when we can start to get some progress in moving forward to be able to heal it.
And we're both big fans of Judy Atkinson, who is probably the greatest warrior that I personally know, both personally and professionally. And for those that don't know Judy and her work, she's a world-leading expert in Indigenous trauma and recovery. I think from memory, she's in her late 70s. She was in her early.
She's experienced.
She's very experienced. But the reason I bring up Judy's age and wisdom is because from my knowledge, and I may be wrong here, so I'm happy to be corrected, I think she was about 35 when she started finding her studies and stuff like that. And in the last 40 plus year career that she has created, she self-funds herself to go to Papua New Guinea to work in communities that are experiencing extreme sexual violence, extreme family violence, and gendered violence, and all this, and even in our own communities as well, going to sit with communities that are, and she'll call out really tough topics on her social media around there's trafficking in communities, there's silencing in communities and stuff like that. But she sits firm in that need to unpack it and have those difficult conversations, because again, she's about why and about solutions. We know that the issues are there and we know that they're systemic, but they're also intergenerationally inherited. Like, this is 230 years of a new culture that's been created, but these communities aren't unique to our mob. They're all in different communities. You got a little one coming to say hello.
I got my little Frankie. She's the boss.
Hello,
So,
Frankie.
Apologies for mid podcast. I got the little boss.
Hello, little.
So hello, Arnie.
Hello, baby. Oh, look at that smile.
Yeah,
see, I think that was.
They can be deceiving.
I think that was a sign that this is the balance. This is why we do the work that we do, is for this next generation. That's why these conversations are necessary.
Yeah, it is. You know, and it's about having these little ones, breaking these cycles for these little ones. You know, and I alluded to it before we got on air. You know, speaking about some conversations that I have and the relationship I have with my dad. And, you know, we sat down a few weeks ago and, you know, there were tears and there was some back and forth as well, about the fact that, he was the best dad he could be to me. Mm-hmm. And, you know, during my younger years, it's fairly well documented that I've been lucky enough to have a sporting career in the NRL and so forth. So I left home when I was 16. Right, left home when I was 16 to go down to Sydney to play, chase my dream in the NRL. Now, the conversations we had with Dad, it was like, I never had any time with you in those years because I was off playing footy. He had his addiction problems as well. And he was just navigating through that, and he was critical of himself, you know. And I said, Dad, you can't even be critical of yourself because he never had a dad. He lost his dad at 9-year-old, you know. So for him, the penny dropped, and that realization that he had, because I could sense he didn't say it. He didn't say it, but I could sense that he was disappointed in himself. But when that penny dropped, or he got to understand that I knew and I wasn't dirty about it, because I understood that he's coming from a place of not knowing how to be a dad as well, right? Because if he lost his dad at 9, he had no one to model it for him. You know, we learn as we go with this sort of stuff, as you know, as many young parents do, and you know, it then opened up a deeper conversation, you know, and you know, we both got sober together, you know, both sober 15 years in December, so that journey of recovery in that is not only about putting down alcohol, but also about growing as men as well, and I've been open in saying the closest I've been with my dad is when we both got sober. and those years of recovery in that, but also well, he was my boxing coach, later in my life as well. So he was my footy coach for many years as a young fella. But those really tough, and as you know, with combat sport, those really tough, soul-searching times when you need to find that extra bit, that 1% that you need. He was there to hold my hand through that. So that really developed and built a relationship that, I even say to people, it's not like we're father and son. It's like we're two best mates,
Yeah. And for those that don't know your story, like, as you said, it's well documented, so people can go and have a bit of a Google and stuff like that. Like, what would be a short version of what you would share with people about your story and kind of where you've ended up?
Yeah, in the short form, I've struggled with suicidal ideation since I was about 13-year-old on the back of fairly severe concussions. I always talk about two significant things that happened at 13. My first NRL contract, my first NRL scholarship contract at 13, which put me on a path that to chase my dreams, and the two things that happened at 13 was that NRL contract scholarship, and also the severe concussion, and on the back of that concussion, for those who are listening that have had concussion, it started a really, really negative dialogue inside my head. But there was a hell of a lot of confusion, as people know, with concussions, and I was questioning everything. What happened? How come it happened? Why did it happen? Will it get back? My memory, all that sort of stuff. So for me, it was about that first concussion. It started a really negative dialogue that started to talk to me and tell me that I was worthless and that I was no good, and that got to the point where it was telling me I should end my life. And I've had that inner dialogue, an inner dialogue that everyone has, but it's just that mine's extremely negative. I've had that inner dialogue since the age of 13, 14, telling me to end my life and planning thoughts, plans, and ideas of suicide every single day, for a young age, a lot of years. And I've still been lucky enough to hold down a sporting career. I played in the NRL system for about 10 years and then retired from the NRL. And what I didn't allude to is that I covered what was happening inside my head with alcohol and drugs for many years. And we look around in communities, the substance use is a lot of the time a band-aid for pain. So for me, it was about band-aiding what was going on inside my head, and I did that through alcohol and drugs. And then I made a decision to clean my life up, because everything that was happening in a negative way in my life, there was one thing in common, that was alcohol and drugs. So I walked away from alcohol and drugs, lost interest in playing in the NRL. Because the only thing I had in common was playing rugby league and partying, and I wasn't partying anymore, and I wasn't enjoying my footy. So I walked away from the NRL at the end of the 2008 season, and then I walked into a boxing gym. And found myself, found out who I was. I started to fight back against what was going on inside my head. And then, the ups and downs in life, I was fighting as a professional fighter, marriage breakdown, relationship breakdowns, suicide attempt in 2012. Then, in psych ward stays, I started to do some soul searching and look at, what it was that when I was well, and I was mentally and emotionally the best that I've ever been when I was in the boxing gym. Because, as you know, again, with combat sport, you fight yourself more days than you fight someone else. Just with, hitting the bag or doing what you're doing, physically and mentally. So boxing taught me how to fight back against what I was going through mentally. And then, I had that suicide attempt in 2012, and for me, I knew that I had to start to make my life about other people and helping other people who are going through those tough experiences. And then in 2014, I started doing that. Started going to schools and workplaces and helping people that are going through the same thing. And it's taken me all around the world. I've written a book about it now. I've done more study, which I'm going to be back doing more study next year. So it's just been a fantastic journey for me in not only helping people, but finding myself, finding the depth of what I need to do to get well and stay well. And I guess it's brought us two together in different times and paths because of the work that we do.
All right, it's good because I think to me this is the work. My children have been in the room when I've shared my story, and it was only recently. So my oldest is 13 and my twins just turned 11. And my youngest daughter, one of the twins, she started to ask me questions about the sexual abuse that I've been through. And particularly, I think the two things that stuck in her head the loudest was the word abuse and the word family. And she goes, Ngamika, so was it really someone that was in our family that hurt you, and not just hurt you, but hurt you in that way? And I had to sit with my little one and unpack that. And she goes, but why do you talk about that? Like, why do you share that? And that was it's more difficult for me to speak about my story and my experiences at home in my community than it is in front of schools or in the news or whatever, because the consequences and the impact, and there are consequences when you start to speak publicly about these things, because some people are so uncomfortable with us having those conversations but it was my understanding that I'm breaking that cycle with her. Like, we get to create a new conversation and a new level of awareness. And where would you say, because I know for me, like, I look back over my journey, and reflection is a really massive part of my life over the last 3 years. And I imagine it's going to continue to be for the next 3 years when I unpack where I'm going. Because as a business person, there's so many different directions you can go, and there's so many things that you can do. But I often wonder where I would have ended up without sport. Like, if I hadn't have found, not just sport, but like jiu-jitsu, I don't know where I would have ended up if I didn't have jiu-jitsu. And I'm very grateful that I don't have to find out. But for me, my trauma and my feeling less than, you're never good enough, plays out in the gym. Of, like you said, often you got to fight yourself more than you got to fight anyone else. And for me, when I was going at world titles, like, that was my way of proving to other people and proving to myself that I'm worthy, that I'm good enough, and just to have something to channel all that into. I don't know where I would have ended up without that. What would you say have you?
You're right. People don't understand or underestimate the actual life lessons that sport gives us. I was doing a chat with brother Dean Witters from the NRL. And Dean and I were roomies when we played together at the Rabbitohs. And Dean said he learned so much about playing footy for life. Things like turning up on time, discipline of going to, making every effort count on the training paddock, and then working to a clock on the field, and strategy and so much about life has developed in his sporting career. And he's dead right, and as I just mentioned, like, people who go through challenges mentally and emotionally, you'll find that anyone involved in combat sport are super mentally strong, because of, as I mentioned, we got to fight ourselves every single day when we go into that gym. It's more than fighting an opponent. It's fighting against yourself, who's racing against that clock on the wall. When we're looking at, the buzzer going at the end of the round, or how many punches or strikes you got to get in before the end of the round. So you're constantly having to challenge yourself. And how I related that to my life outside the ring was that it was teaching me how to fight back. Like, everything was telling me to stop outside the ring. Everything was telling me to give up outside the ring. But everything also was telling me to give up inside the ring, you know, because I wasn't a physically tough person. You know, when people laughed at me when I went from rugby league to boxing, because I wasn't a naturally tough person. I didn't have that grit, you know. But for me, boxing taught me how to bite down on my mouthpiece in those tough times and search deep within myself. Now, deep within myself as a rugby league player, I didn't like the person I found. I was a scared little boy. But when I searched deep within myself as a boxer and now as a man, because of the tools that I was taught through boxing, I like that person I fight. I like that person will stand next to me and start swinging when he needs to, you know, as much as, and this goes back to a really important conversation that I had with my dad the day he found out about my suicide attempt. He got in the car and drove over a few hours to sit with me. And, you know, there were tears and even laughter. And, you know, as many of us mob do, we often make jokes out of tough situations so we can break the mood a little bit. But he told me about the story. He said, I want to talk to you about the story. And I've documented this in my book as well. I want to talk about the story about the little boy that's inside you, or the little girl who's inside you, right? He said, we've all got this little boy or little girl inside us, and that little boy or little girl is terrified. And that little boy or little girl comes up against situations and issues every single day that we are frightened of, right? And he said, now imagine yourself as that little boy, or you're walking with that little boy, and you come up to a dark hallway with a door at the end. He said, what are you going to do with that little boy? You know, you got to get through that hallway, and you've got to get through that door at the end of it. What are you going to do? And the vibrato inside of me said, I'm going to smash that door down. And he said, no, that's not what you do. Leadership is when you put your hand out and you walk that little boy through it and say, hang on a minute, I know you're scared. I'm scared too, but together we can do this. So he talks to me, you know, in that time, and I refer to it a lot about the little boy or little girl that lives deep inside us. And you have to think about it. Any tough situation that we go through, that little boy or little girl jumps up in front of that door and goes, no, it's too dark, it's too scary, we can't walk through it. That's any situation that we have. You know, any time, any situation mentally or emotionally and even physically that's tough, that little boy or little girl will jump out in front of that door and say, no, don't go through. It's too scary. We don't know what's on the other side. So constantly I had to put my hand out to that little boy who lives inside me and just say, you know what, it's all right. We got this. We got it together. And that story of the little boy that my dad told that day, again, there were tears, and there were, you know, two staunch men sitting on the front step, you know, out the front of our home in Dubbo, you know, crying to each other. You know, and that's where I always say that there's so much strength in vulnerability. You know, we've been conditioned to try and be tough, or conditioned to try and have this vibrato, this front, because we've been conditioned to not show signs of weakness. And that's, as Aboriginal people, as the first people here, First Nation people, it's been conditioned into us too, because we can't show signs of weakness to that welfare man who's coming to take our kids. We can't show signs of weakness of that white government man who's coming up and telling us that we're no good. You know, so and how I refer to it back like that, again, that's the trauma that we speak to. We don't do it now as a front to non-Aboriginal people who are against us now. We do it as a front to the conditioned behaviours that have been planted within our cellular to what happened 100 years ago, you know, 150, 200 years ago. I say this, I talk about generational trauma, I speak about this, give this example. Now I haven't had any alcohol for nearly 15 years, right? And every single time, without doubt, my heart beats out of my chest like you wouldn't believe when I get pulled up for a random breath test. Every single time, my heart jumps out of my shirt. And I think to myself, wow, it'd want to be strong alcohol if it's going to register. 15 years I haven't had a drink. But why is it that my heart skips a beat and there's almost an implanted fear for the police? That's because for generations, police have taken our kids away. You know, the local government authorities have taken our kids away. Those people who were taking our kids away 200 years ago are now dressed in blue. You know, so it's what we see every single day. You know, when we see the red and blue lights flashing behind us, what have we done? How come we've done it? What are they going to do? Are you kids okay? Is everything all right? You know, it's that implanted fear that we have to try and navigate through every single day in society. And people don't understand that, but it's a constant challenge for us.
With the challenges that you've faced, and as you said, with the darkest moments that you've faced, and then being able to sit with your dad and do that intergenerational work, like little layers at a time, what was it that got you to get up and fight in your darkest moments? Because for people who don't have sport or who don't have martial arts, I think, and sometimes people who haven't gone through as much trauma or as many layers of things, it's not that white people or other groups don't experience trauma, it's the layering of impact. Like, I've got fair skin, like I don't have the same like reactions from other people to me as my, say, darker skin cousins or whatever, like that judgment that comes with that. But my sister, her partner, spoke about an experience that he had with her. Like, when we were kids, we were growing up saying, and we were taught, like, you better behave yourself or their munis will come and get you. And it turned from this thing that was a reality to a fear thing that our parents would put in us to behave ourselves, like, them muni, them police, them mob, they'll come and get you. But my sister was a grown woman and she was walking across the road and her partner looked and she was hiding behind him, like literally trying to physically make herself smaller. And she hadn't even been aware of consciously of what was happening. She was just reacting to the fact that there were two cop cars that were driving past. And you talk about it really well in terms of it being a physical response, because it's not a conscious thing. It's the body bears the trauma, the body keeps count, which is some of the things that I heard from Auntie Judy, who I can't remember the guy who wrote about it, but could you talk a little bit more about that? And I know that you've done the same course that I did a couple of years ago, and how that's kind of, because I think there's one thing to do this work, but then there's another thing to educate yourself about it and have that lived experience of it, but then the theoretical knowledge to put a name to things and to understand things.
Yeah, what that course did for me, and Auntie Judy came up to me and she said, Joe, you're already speaking the language. You already understand what's going on. You just have, it'd be good for you to do the course to give you a bit more depth in it, right? Now, what that course did to me, it gave me the research. It gave me the evidence to what I was talking to. It helped me to understand the depth of what I was talking about. Now, you know, when you talk about physical response, you know, and we have these physical responses, and I have these physical responses all the time, and that speaks a lot to what we call emotional intelligence, right? Is that there are so many people in our community that get the wrong thing said to us, and then we just boom fire out with, you know, with something that's, you know, aggressive or a reaction to, you know, to some things that happen in the interim moment, right? And how I come to understand it was through reflective writing. Well, now with reflecting writing, you look at the experience as to what happened. You then reflect on what happened, and then you find out what you're learning from it. Now, too often we look at the experience and we just look at the reflection. You know, the reflection is a physical response, but we don't look at the reflection of what happens emotionally, internally to us, and the chemistry of what happens with that sort of stuff, you know. So for me, that course taught me so much about my inner reflections in interim moments. So it helped me to understand that I can learn in that process rather than just respond in that process. And then once we take that deep breath and learn through that reflection, that's when we can grow emotionally. And that's what, and again, what I spoke about, that's what alludes to emotional intelligence. Not having a complete, outburst, physical outburst in these times, because then we get judgment straight away, and we don't look at why, we look at what. Okay, so a lot of everything I speak about is let's start to look at and understand why it happened rather than what happened. And that I learned so much about that through reflective processes for me individually. So then I can help others, do that sort of stuff as well. That process. That course, it helped me label what it is that we go through. But I actually challenged one of the lecturers, and I said, everything you're telling us in how to heal here, our old people have been doing forever. Our ancestors have been doing for thousands of years. We talk about, mindfulness, and we talk about meditation. We talk about, all these different practices that are to keep us well. Our old people have been doing these for thousands of years. They've just relabeled them and renamed them. So how I believe how we heal is to go back to and have a look at what our old people did. The resilience, we don't speak enough to the resilience of Aboriginal people. And again, people who understand trauma, right? We don't speak enough to the resilience of Aboriginal people. We just speak to the reaction of Aboriginal people. Whilst we've got to navigate our way through that every single day, but so whilst we don't or may not have reactions, what we're doing is we need to have a look at how resilient we are to not react, if you get me. I'm talking a little bit round in circles here, and I'm getting distracted a little bit by these two running around mad in the background.
All good.
Thank you. We'll close the door.
Yeah, but I think this is the way we do business. It's not our babies sitting somewhere else. They're usually in the room, or they're around the outer circles of things as we do them. And we both know as parents, it's not what you do. It's not what you say. It's what you do around our kids. Our kids are the biggest bullshit detectors going. Like they know. It's like you sit there and you go, don't do as I do as I say. And they're like, no, but I'm going to do as you do.
They're sponges, right? They look at us and they reflect, their behaviours reflect on what we do too.
Yes.
So that's why we have to be so careful at what we do, what we say, how we act.
The energy.
The responses we have. Energy, of course.
So with the challenges that you faced and stuff, and you've mentioned your book, where are you at now? Where is your journey taking you? Because I often speak a lot, and I think for me personally, especially as an athlete, I've looked at my greatest moments of success and my greatest moments of failure in terms of being in the competition arena. And the moments I fought the best is when I came from the heart, not the head. Because for me, my head has got so much trauma, so much noise, so much negative bias in there, that when I really ground myself and go back to those ancient protocols and those sacred traditions of going, ground yourself first, breathe and reconnect, but not connect to the mind, but connect back to the heart and the gut. And I can go, it doesn't matter whether I win or lose out there. What matters is that I show up and that I fight my fight. It's not about the outcome. It's about showing up for that process, because by being there and doing that I'm going to learn so much more about myself than winning or losing. Like that's an outcome, that's feedback. It's that process and that effort and that showing up. But then when I've tried to get into my head and I've tried to visualize myself winning, and I come from a very different experience. Martial arts to me was a form of survival. It was a process to find myself. I didn't start jiu-jitsu to win world titles. That was just an outcome of me looking to find something to help myself, because I knew that if I didn't help myself, I would be the one to do more damage to either myself or my children.
Yeah, you know, and that reflective process is so important, right? In anything that we do, in everything that we do, especially as combat athletes, right? Is that our biggest resilience? And again, I wrote about this in my book. I wrote a chapter on resilience in my book, or how I built resilience was through losses. Because your next fight mightn't be for 6 months, but you still got to turn up in the gym every day, and you've got to constantly learn and constantly grow as a person, whilst having to deal with that loss as your last marker. So it's constantly having to turn up every day and do the little things right, and that's conditioning, learning through conditioning, conditioning our practice, right? So okay, the reason you lost the last fight is because you dropped your left hand, right? And talking boxing, of course, because you dropped your left hand. So for 6 months, you work on keeping your left hand up, so that practice is building a resilience, which people might think, keeping your left hand up is easy, but you're thinking about so many other different things. You drop your left hand almost as if you're not even thinking about it. But then you have to work at, again, that next 6 months is training your body physically so it doesn't drop your left hand, so it's always there, so it's always on the spot.
Muscle memory.
Muscle memory, right? That's the word I was looking for. And that muscle memory then conditions your mentality to what you do. So every single time you think to yourself, no, I can't drop that left hand. No, I can't drop that left hand, which is always constantly building that muscle memory, but also building that resilience. And that's what, so I didn't realize that I didn't realize that. Hang on, Mama.
And play.
Okay, can Daddy just finish this, please?
We need it for some make it a bit and
I'll come and kiss it better soon. Thank you. It's just constantly, setting over and working over and continuously working on behaviours that physically might keep us in a good stead to win a fight, but it's mentally and emotionally, the training those behaviours is what's building our resilience.
Yeah. So now you've got a book. You've got a book, and it's The Enemy Within. And I know that you go into a lot of schools and a lot of kind of communities and do a lot of work. That smile is just melting me. Like, oh, now you're putting your fists up. You heard us talking about boxing. Huh?
For the listeners, you're talking about my daughter's smile, not my smile. So
yeah, no, Joe's little one has been in and out visiting us with her presence. So that's why you'll hear her stories, and she's making her presence heard. And we actually, Joe and I discussed this beforehand. He's got 2 daughters, and I've got 2 daughters, and I've got 1 son, and Joe's got 3 sons.
3 boys.
The difference between our girls and our boys, and the fact that the girls are so much more like challenging and fierce and just kind of staunch in their attitudes. And I said, maybe it's generationally, it's their time, like they're being given permission to bring that forth, because for so long, not just for Indigenous women for the last 200 plus years of colonisation, but even in some European history, women were second-class citizens, and and in other countries and other cultures, women belong to their father or their brothers or their husbands. They never actually belong to themselves. And to see our girls taking up that space, one, it can challenge as a parent, but yeah, that conversation we had.
Yeah, it's, you know, and we're talking about generations and generations, again, of conditioned behaviours. So the best way to look at it is that, you know, I've got a 2-year-old girl sitting on my lap now who runs the house, right? And that's just because she's a free spirit at the moment. Yeah, we get them to 16-year-old and they have to behave a certain way, and you know, and again, that's all conditioned behaviours. You know, we look at our communities, our First Nation communities. Many of our communities were dominated by the, you know, the matriarchal lineage of, you know, through decision making. And that's why I've always said I believe that a brilliant prime minister will be an Aboriginal woman, because Aboriginal women and women in general just get the family sorted, get every, you know, the small practical things, you know, get the family sorted, get everything. As a dad being home, I don't know how to put the hang on, Daddy will have those points. I don't know how to get the washing done, get the dinner cooked, get the cleaning done, get all this 10 jobs at once. Man, I can't do that. And females just get it done on their ear like it's no challenge at all. I think there's something in that, you know, like we should tap into that more. And that like just completely having the authority and the balancing act of running a family, keeping the house clean, and you know, when it's left up to me, I might do 3 out of 10 things. You know, when it's left up to Courtney, she gets 12 out of 10 things done and plans the next 3. You know, so like I think it speaks to the resilience and the task handling of and strength of Aboriginal women. That's why I'm a huge advocate for females and feminism in general, because I believe that you know, Beyonce said it best: "Who run the world?" Right? You know?
Well, look at Jacinda Ardern and how she's handled things through her leadership. Like, she rocked up and she had baby formula or something on her thing, and she didn't make a big deal out of it. She just wiped it off and she got on with it. And she goes, showing up for leadership and being a politician doesn't mean that you can't be strong and kind at the same time. But I even heard, and I'm not sure if it was Les Brown or Eric Thomas, but he was talking to a group of African-American men. And he's like, brothers, who is out there raising our next generation? Who hasn't quit on them? Our women.
Yeah.
So where are we showing up? But I do have to own up to something right now. It's my partner, George, who is the full-time stay-at-home parent for our kids. He's the one who is, I call him my nest and my rock to my bundle. So while I'm off flying around doing all this stuff, he's on the nest down. He's on the nesting. And even with my family, like my dad at the moment is a foster carer. My dad's 62 and he's become a foster carer for 6-week-old twin baby boys. And my partner, I'm down here in Melbourne working and whatever, after a full week of looking after his mum and our kids and whatnot, he'll often go to my dad's house and spend a night there looking after these 2 little baby boys so my dad can have a rest. But he's just that type of person, and he just holds this calm space. And I think that we are creating different conversations and change. What would be, like, the work that you're doing now, what would be your warrior dream? Like, what does it mean to lead from the heart and to show up? Like, what is your vision for the work?
My vision's changed a little bit, you know, with what I do, and predominantly for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been in communities all over the country, you know, upwards of 50 communities a year, you know, flying in, flying out, you know, empowering communities, you know, giving them a bit of hope, and sharing experience. But you know, what I want to strip it back and start to concentrate to be stuck in the one spot a little bit more, where I can put some effective change. So I've just written a 12-week trauma recovery program, which is about, you know, giving young people tips and tools to be able to have a look at that reflective stuff that I'm talking about, you know, understand what's going on inside their head and know that it's coming from somewhere else, and giving them tools to be able to navigate their way through that. So that's what we're doing at the moment, you know, and the course is about healing spirit. So healing the spirit of young people. And then, you know, I'd love, my dream is to start that, you know, roll it out through New South Wales to start with, you know, train up different people to be able to host and run this program, but then also, you know, have healing centres right throughout the country that specialise in, you know, rolling out this program and this trauma recovery and healing type process, which gives our young people new tools to be able to navigate through this thing we call life.
I like the sound of that. I mean, I'm in a similar situation. It's like I've got time in when I'm 50 and onwards to be traveling the world, but right now I'm really I feel like I'm being called to sit at home, not just for my family and stuff, but my community, but also for my own development. Like I was talking to a few of my titters and saying, where's the time and space for us to learn what we need to learn to become the next generation of aunties? Like in this Western world, there's people want our knowledge now, right? It's starting to become commercially viable to be an Aboriginal business and an Aboriginal expert, because all of a sudden there's this hunger in both positive and tokenistic and negative. Like there's all these different balances, like anything new. But how do we, like if I'm living in Melbourne and I've got a big corporate job or a big executive position, or even just working in an organisation, saying, hey, once a month I need to go home for a long weekend and I want this to be a part of my work, is to go home and sit on country with my aunties so I can learn. And they look at you and go, and that's having those conversations of going, well, how do we build that next generation of aunties? Because there's this gap. There's all these young people that are being identified as leaders, but when do they get the chance to stuff up?
What we need to have a look at is, and again, this is about walking in two worlds, right? So looking at what we've done forever. We've been sitting at a table for 200 years. It's uncomfortable, right? So what we need to do is start having those conversations with non-Indigenous Australia and start saying our professional development is our country. You know, when we have our PD days, you know, you have your days of professional development where you might go to university, or our uni's in the bush. Our uni's sitting down with them old people. You know what I mean? So it's about framing what we do in their language.
Yeah.
And which then opens up their eyes. And I say, like, you know, for my professional development, I need to go out and sit with the old man. And that's how I got to learn. That's how I got to ground myself, and that's how I got to be a better person to be able to come and have interactions and influences on these next generation of young men, right? So that's my professional development. So you would give me time off to go to university and do that. Why don't you give me time to go and sit with my old people and do that? You know, so it's about framing what we do in their language, and you know, they need to start valuing our ways of learning as well, which then, you know, and all that is, as I've said, we've been sitting at a table for 200 years that doesn't quite suit us. It's time to sit at our table,
which is on the ground around a campfire.
100%, and start to learn with us. And that come from the first conversation that changed my whole perspective of what I go through, right? And sitting with my old, who I call my grandfather, cultural ways, right? Is it, hang on, Mama. Hang on, Mama. You gotta find it quick. Sitting down with that old grandfather, and he said, Joe, you're not mentally ill. I don't care what the doctors say to you. I'm gonna find it, Mama. I don't know, where'd you put it? She's just lost something, and she put it somewhere, and it's my fault that she can't find it.
Of course, not bad.
And he said to me, you're not mentally ill. I don't care what the doctors tell you. you're spiritually ill. And as soon as you heal your spirit, that's when you get well. And you can't heal your spirit sitting inside an office all day. You got to heal your spirit on country. And it just it was like 10 pennies dropping at once. You know, for me, I've always been safe mentally, emotionally, and well when I'm on country, when I'm doing cultural practice, when I'm sitting and around that fire, as you said, and telling story. That's healing my spirit. You know, so we need to, and in all of my programs of the Enemy Within is called Wagga, which in our language, in Wiradjuri language, is healthy spirit. You know, we're going to have a healthy spirit to have a healthy mental state of mind and a healthy, you know, physical state of being as well.
Yeah. I think, and that's a perfect way. I'll ask you one more question because I know she's like, come on, woman, you're on my time here. That's my dad. What would be a piece of advice or a perspective or something that you would want to share with someone that's kind of, because I talk about people that they've got this feeling that there's something calling them, but they're not quite sure how to step into that. What would be something that you would give them on that journey?
I believe in all of my teaching. Hang on, Daddy's talking. I believe in all of my teaching is that our path's set, right? So forever, we want to do this, we want to do that. Where, you know, a sister of mine, Lizzie Waimara, she's from the Cape, and Torres Strait mob. She said to me, the only responsibility that we've got is acceptance. And it took me a little bit to understand that, is that if we believe that the path is set, if we believe that everything is going to happen when it's going to happen, why it's going to happen, we have to have that acceptance to be able to sit in that and just wait for it. You know, like the last 18 months, 2 years I've been going through. Daddy is talking. The last 18 months, 2 years, I've been going through a real transition, tough change period. And it was Lizzie's words that constantly just said to me, just be patient. It's happening for you. Just be patient. You know, and we just got to follow that path. And because what she said was, we just got to hand it over and have that acceptance that our path is set. If tough experiences are happening right now, they may not make sense now, but they will later. You know, and that might be in 1, 2 years, in 5 years, in 10 years. I had to go through what I went through mentally and emotionally with my suicide attempt. I have to keep going through that now to continuously learn for what's coming. I don't know what's coming yet. I just need to have trust in the journey, trust in the path, that it's going to be okay and that everything will make sense. And for me, I had to go through that suicide attempt to propel me into helping young people, to propel me into the work that I do now, because I wasn't on that path. Thought I was going to be a rugby league player forever. Then that changed to be a boxer. I thought I was going to be a boxer forever. Then that changed. I had my suicide attempt, and that's put me onto the path that I'm on now. What's next? I don't know. I just got to make sure I do what the best I can every single day to continue to, not only improve my life, but improve the life of other people around me, and continue to be a leader for my young people every day. The kids who look at me, and I, walk in front of them every single day.
Look, I think that's a perfect way to finish up our yarn. I think your little one's there. She's like, nah, come on, yeah.
I'm so sorry.
No. For me, this is how we do business. This is how we create change, is that they're absorbing that energy. They're around those conversations. And if listeners don't like that background noise, they're more than welcome to take a walk, because I don't have any editing skills or anything like that. These for me is very raw conversations to share people's journey, because what I see is there's this calling that people have a choice to make whether to show up for themselves, because there's a lot of people who are being offered the opportunity to fight for themselves, and they either don't think it's possible, or for whatever reason, without judgment or whatever, but truth being truth telling, is they're choosing not to show up for the fight. Because, and for me, if you're over the age of 16, you've got to start taking responsibility for yourself in whatever shape or form you can. Because for me, under 15, they can't help themselves. Like, it's the adults around them that need to do that work. But once we get to a certain point, good, bad or ugly, we all have a choice to make moving forward. Because that's why as adults we have, or as human beings, we have this thing called consciousness and unconsciousness and spirituality. And I agree with you. Like, I've been called for a while to just surrender, stop thinking that I have control and whatever. And for me, I think it's that balance of being, I'm showing up to do the work. I'm following that calling that I've got, but I can't control where it's going to lead. And right now I know I'm being called to go home, but for some reason I was resisting. And a sister, Karen Demery, who has the Staunch Sisterhood one, and I rang her and she's like, she cut me off after like 10 seconds. She goes, them old ones are telling you they're going to hit you over the head in a minute with a truck or something. You just go home and trust that they will give you what you need. You already have everything. You don't, like, you need to go home. That's your next step. You don't need to know anything beyond that. And yeah, so I think that for anyone that's listening that's been through hardship, Joe and I found our way through sport and through storytelling. And then now both through reflection, and our purpose is to help other people through those journeys by being the change we want to see in the world. And Joe, if people want to reach out to you or they want to follow your journey, where can they find you?
Get out of me easiest on my website, which is www.joewilliams.com.au, and all my social media handles and so forth are all through that. My email and that's all through that. Instagram is JoeWilliams_TEW, which is for the enemy within. Joe Williams_TEW, which is on Twitter and on Instagram as well.
Look, you mob, do yourself a favour, go and follow Joe. He's one of the staunchest brothers I know, and he tells the truth, but he speaks from the heart and tends to hold space for difficult conversations, and he's just doing phenomenal work. Thank you so much for your time today, Joe, and thank you so much to little Frankie for visiting us and being a part of the conversation. She definitely brought a smile to the and a good energy to the space.
For everyone listening to this, you'll hear about her in the next 10 to 15, 20 years. You know, she's a go-getter, put it that way.
Thanks so much, Joe. Hope you have a deadly day. And yeah, we'll have to have you back on down the track. But thank you so much for making time and space for the Warrior Dreaming podcast.
Always a pleasure, sister. And love your work always. Always here to support.
All right. Thanks, Joe. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.